Is this officially the most boring transfer window ever, with clubs spending almost £0, with some clubs actually not making a single signing? Today we are debating, why is this summer window so boring? You've got Sky Sports covering the Olympics. They don't even want to talk about football because there's nothing to talk about. So let's come to you first, Reese. The obvious one that people are saying is, oh, well, we've had the Euros, there's Copa America. Do you think that is a real factor in why clubs are just not bothering?
Yeah, that has to be the starting factor. If you look at Euro competitions, World Cup competitions, Copa Americas, etc., they take up a huge chunk of a post-season, pre-season side. So clubs have to factor in that once those tournaments are over, they've then got to fit in time to go even on a pre-season tour, like Arsenal in the US at the moment. So it's a busy time. But also, it's very easy for a lot of players to not only catch the eye, but to become instantly overinflated in their price. And if you look through history, there is a track record of players being signed off the back of a good summer tournament, only to fail to deliver. James Rodriguez at Real Madrid, many would argue, was a flop. Andre Arshavin, when he joined Arsenal a few months after the Euros, is considered a disappointment. And in the past, you've had players like El Hadji Diouf, Milan Baros at Liverpool, who failed to deliver after their impressive tournaments. So clubs aren't going to be fooled into just throwing money at a table, when they've got to try and get negotiations over the line when a player just wants to focus on their country. And then they've got to rest and do their pre-season tours. So it has to be the big first sort of notable stumbling block at the moment, where clubs aren't going to pull the trigger yet. They want to be a bit more sensible.
Yeah, and I think another one to throw in, obviously we've mentioned Copa America and Euros, but you've now got the Olympics on as well. And albeit a lot of the players from the Premier League maybe aren't in the Olympics, but I know there's a few. So it's like, if you're an agent trying to sell your player and negotiate, you're doing it all through a phone basically, and probably through WhatsApp. Like, it's not the same on Zoom trying to get someone to join a new club. So I do think that is a fair reason for clubs to, I guess, delay or maybe just not bother at all.
Yeah, but you got to remember, there's a lot of money that these players have got. It's not hard to fly yourself over to, to the sort of Copa America. Speaking of Alvarez, for example, he's in Paris now. It's not hard to go from Manchester to Paris, if that's even where his agent is, or he's been in America. So it's not. I think that's a slight poor excuse for teams, but it will be harder because you're not going to get straight answers. Whereas you might go, right, let's get in a room, let's discuss what your contract might be if you're going to join us. It's easier to do that when they've not got a tournament and going, I'm concentrating on that tournament. However, I think there are ways around it, and I don't think that should be a complete factor in what's stopping players from being signed and why so little has been spent, because it's happened before in tournaments. I guess also players aren't even with their clubs at the moment. They've not even gone back after pre-season. So the likes of the English players, so Foden, I know, is not back. Rodri's not back for City. You've got probably Palmer's not back. I don't think Saka's back. Rice, for example. So they've not even had a chance to go back to their clubs, discuss what's going to go on for next year before making a decision. But how late are you leaving it? You can't have it. It could be a great, transfer deadline day, which has sort of slowly got worse and worse because teams have got their stuff done early on. So now it could be a really exciting final transfer deadline day, or it is just going to remain boring and teams are going to just stay where they are.
Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. And I guess as well, on the flip side, you've got a lot of new managers, and maybe managers, if they can't use the players in training or they're not in the pre-season friendlies, they don't know whether they want to sell them either. So I think it probably does work both ways. In terms of other reasons, and if we're saying that's not a good enough excuse, are we finally seeing FFP actually being a factor? Because we've laughed it off for years, haven't we? We all have. But until very recently this season, have we ever really seen a real sanction? Obviously, City with 115 charges we know are ongoing, but we've actually seen PSR fines or punishments come in real life points deductions. So are clubs just scared now?
Not scared, but I think they're going to be wary of it. Obviously, the deadline for the last one was June 30th. Hence why we saw Newcastle sell Anderson for about 35 million quid to Forest. So that factor comes into it. I know that they voted on new rules and they voted in for changing, which is no real shock. They all wanted it, and as soon as it's gone against them, they've decided they don't want it anymore. But that doesn't come into play for a while. I think the new FFP rules don't come into play for like another year or something. So there's going to be caution because clubs just can't throw money at it. I know we're seeing Aston Villa doing some big moves, but they've still sold Diaby for 50 million quid, and we're probably not going to be shocked if something does come up in the next few months, because I think they were under pressure beforehand. So whether or not they will or not, but clubs are going to be quite wary, and also clubs have got big squads now. They've got players to offload. If Nottingham Forest want to make more deals, they've got to sell surely, because there's a lot of players already there. So it's a fine balancing act, and I think clubs have wised up now, and rightly so, that the leagues have clamped down on. I know it's your money to spend, but getting ridiculous and out of hand and evening it out a little bit.
I do kind of think it has sort of the points deduction to Everton and to Forest. I do think teams are going, oh right, actually this could have consequences for us. So we're probably not going to go out and sort of do what Chelsea did last year by spending an absolute ton of money. They're like, actually, we can't do that because a 10-point deduction for us could stop us getting European places, could get you relegated, kind of thing. I know both of them teams survived. I didn't mean exactly Chelsea, Jordan. I saw you smirk there. But it's more, it can impact you massively. And last year, the two teams that got the deductions got away with it, really. I think they were lucky that the three sides that came up were so poor, because in other seasons, they would have gone down, and that would have been due to the FFP. So I think other teams are now like, we can't get away with this. So I think that's probably the aspects of it. Obviously, it's like over a 3-year period that they factor in. So I think they're able to calculate exactly how much they can and can't spend. And it's probably a lot of clubs are like, we need to sell before we can buy, just so we don't mess it up and be over. So that's kind of how I see it, really. That's how this sort of FFP, PSR sort of rules have come in and actually affected the transfer market, which could be good or could be bad for the Premier League, depending on how you look at it.
You can expect as well that because there was such a lack of action in January, that would surely save clubs money. So they're probably going to look at it and go, okay, we can put the money to the table now in the summer, and they don't waste money in January. Most teams waste their money in January, don't they? So it probably gives them a reason to spend all the money now in the summer.
Well, so far it looks like they're not, though. That's the problem. And I think as much as we've all, I know to some degree we're biased from more Chelsea City, where we've overspent in years, but like we all say, oh, we want PSR, we want FFP, but do we really want do we really want to see transfer windows like this? I know Chelsea, to be fair, looking at our Twitter, we're still very active in the market, but there's not really been any marquee signings for any club.
No.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but other than Mbappe, which we already knew was done and wasn't done in this window, there's not really been anything major, I don't think. I know Arsenal have obviously got Calafiori over the line.
Yeah.
That was a free transfer, so it meant nothing. It wasn't any money spent.
Yeah. And obviously
come out and said City aren't going to sign anyone unless someone leaves, and we've only signed Savio. That's it. Arsenal have technically bought Raya, but that was like a transfer from the year before, and you've just signed a centre back. Is it centre back from Italy?
Yeah, centre back, left back. Calafiori's joined today, which was obviously part of the transfer plan anyway, with the link of a midfielder and a striker. But it's not much of a shock we're expecting this. Everyone goes on about these exciting transfer windows, but clubs don't need to play up to that. It become a bit of a circus in the end. If we look at deadline day and that nonsense of making this entertainment and charade, it was unnecessary. Clubs have wised up to it. Yes, media outlets are bigging it up still, but that's dead in the water. You might get a bit of a spike now because tournaments have pushed them back a little bit. So you might get a bit more entertainment, but clubs have wised up now. They're doing smarter business. I know a lot of people going on about Villa's business. When everyone says a team's had an amazing transfer window, how many times do they have a poor season? PSG a couple of years back, Spurs when they sold Bell, everyone raved about them signings. It didn't work out. Emery's second season at Arsenal, and he signed all those players, and it didn't work out. Chelsea when Frank Lampard signed the players, didn't work out. So whenever this amazing transfer window it never works. So they've got to be smart with their business. They've got to make the right investment. Clubs are losing players for free now, despite spending millions of pounds on them. So they need to know what they're getting bang for their buck. The scoutings are better. The data analysis is better. So it's not a case of it being boring. It's a case of it being sensible. All right? I used to complain about the transfer window. I had a period from 2008 to about 2014 where we did nothing every single year. But it didn't kill us financially. It's killed a lot of teams financially. So, it's not a case of being exciting. It's about being sensible.
I think the multi-signings is a good point, to be honest. Because I think that is the key. And we saw it with Forest as well as another example where they just signed, 20 odd players in a window. And it's like, it's not practical. You can't bed them into the team. So maybe you're right, as well as FFP, clubs are starting to wise up to that. You've got to build carefully over time rather than just try and build a new squad from scratch and buy it in a window. In terms of, I guess, other reasons that could be a factor, we know definitely last summer Saudi was ridiculous and a massive fundamental part of the window. I know there's still rumours, probably the highest profile one is Edison being linked at the minute, at least from the Premier League. That's probably the biggest. A Saudi toning things down? Is it a little bit of a China situation where they go crazy, they overspend, and then it's like, oh, actually, we need to rein it in?
Again, it's sensible. They obviously went on that big splurge last year. Most teams got ridiculous value for players that they never in a million years would have got. So clubs managed to get their way around things like that. Saudi got those players because they were looking to boost the profile of the league. Yes, they've boosted the profile, but I would argue how many of us still watch it. I don't think we do. I mentioned this when we did a podcast on this, that signing players in their twilight years isn't going to attract you to the league. You want players in their peak. You want players that are up and coming, young and hungry, and they're more difficult to attract. The clubs are being a bit more sensible. If you notice that they've not just signed players, they've appointed a lot more backroom and technical staff, especially at board level. They're taking it seriously. They're saying, we can't just sign players because they're a big name. We need to sign the right players. They're treating it as a business. If they want to be treated seriously, they've got to act seriously. And that's what they're doing. They're taking that approach. You'll probably find there'll be a lot of maybe young players that will come over if they can get them. Of course, that's going to be the approach, and that's going to be their right approach to grow their league. So scaling back, yes, but the money's still on the table. If Salah becomes available in a couple of years, they're going to throw their money at it. There's no doubt. But it's got to be for the right player. Let's be honest, most of the players they bought were players where everyone was looking to offload. So
yeah, and that's the problem. You attract a few. So I think Neves went, and maybe Diaby, I'd argue, is not. You wouldn't say Diaby's past it. So maybe that's a good example of Saudi still having some relevance.
I was looking at an article, and it does say that they are cutting. They're not cutting the spending, but they're focusing on the spending elsewhere. So it's obviously they're funded by what's called the Public Investment Fund, PIF, and they've got that money is not just for the football clubs. That's for Saudi Arabia and any big projects they've got on. And from what it's saying, they've called it giga projects, and they've got quite a few on. So that's where their money's going. They've got a big project coming for 2030. So this is probably what stopped their spending being as much as it was last year, which was around about £750 million that was spent from them. And they got the likes of, as mentioned, Neymar. They had Ruben Neves, Kante, Ronaldo's out there. It's things like that you probably won't see as much. And I think Reece is right. They are going to start aiming for younger players. They want to develop their players, but they also want to bring in players because they don't want their league just to be a retirement home. And after a few years, then you're or left with nothing. So that's where I think they are going to probably aim for younger players. So Diaby, I don't know how old he is, but that's still going in the right direction from, you know, the likes of the 30-year-olds, Ronaldo's even 40 kind of aspect. So that's where I sort of see it. It is trickling down the reason why the money's not in their clubs. And I also read, I didn't know if it was true or not, I've not heard of anything for, but Saudi Arabia are getting the 2034 World Cup. So that's where domestic football is not going to be of interest. They are going to want to make that World Cup to be, you know, spectacular, superb, and that's where the money's going to go. And it's not going to go to signing players. It's going to be on the infrastructure to host the games. So that's probably why I think they're going to. It's not going to be as much money as other clubs probably were hoping for this summer.
To be honest, I think the point around sort of academy and up and coming players is actually quite a good argument, and I think that could work long term. Obviously, you've still got to attract the players, and you've got to make it a big enough league to be televised and I guess get your reputation out there. But that could be a good argument for, I guess, you could argue young players. It might end up corrupting them if they're getting paid more than they would have in England at that level. But we see, and probably Chelsea more than most, how many young loan players have we, you know, just brought in through the academy, loaned out, sold for a few mil. Maybe some of these players could be tempted by a Saudi offer where they're probably getting a little bit higher than what they'd be paid by in England. They do get experience. They're going to get guaranteed game time. That long term, maybe that could be the route for Saudis. I can see it working, but again, they need the coverage on those leagues.
But you create the issue of, obviously they'll go predominantly for the wages. So if you're a young 18-year-old wonder kid, they give you 200 grand a week instantly. You're not going to lower those demands. A lot of clubs aren't going to pay that. Do you know what I mean? That's the issue that league has created, but they're restructuring, so it makes sense. And it'd be interesting to see them compete in that level with Europe in terms of their sort of transfer activity, because it would make it more interesting, you know, going in for those players. And
but if they want to promote their league, it's difficult by signing a 20-year-old, because you get a few stars.
Yeah.
But like, let's say Haaland, we bought him, you know, 21. At that point, is he realistically going to go, yeah, I'll go to Saudi? That would promote the Saudi league. But he's sort of going, why would I do that? It's sort of like, I understand what you're saying, John, with the academy players who don't make it. That could be an option for them. But for the players that are expected to make it and be these stars, I think it's unrealistic for them to actually want to go to Saudi, because it's not that, like, it's not the stage.
Yeah, do people care? That was going to be my point. It's like, let's take Haaland as that example. If he goes and breaks all the records like he did in the Prem in Saudi, does that get him the what's the word I'm looking for? Does that get him the sort of prestige, if you like? Does that give him reputation of being unreal, or is it just like, oh, it's just Saudi? So I think that's quite an interesting point.
It loops back to the point of it's still a young league, so, or youngish, or however you want to put it in terms of its stages right now. So it's going to take time to get to that model, but it loops back to the fact that as well, with players are very career orientated. Haaland knows the career he wants to make. Players just don't join a club for the sake of a club. They're very career focused, like a promotion, so to speak. So Sardi's not going to be on the table. Haaland knew going to Salzburg, going to Dortmund, that was part of that plan. You're going to get more of that. Players are on not only in that method of thinking, they've got longer contracts now, more expensive to buy out, harder to get hold of. So, you know, you look at, say, Ivan Toney currently, people are just going to wait for him to go for free, because that's the game now. People are just going to wait for contracts to run out, swoop in. That's the way the business has gone, and that's another reason it's probably so quiet. You know, it's how it's all changed. Clubs are more business savvy, and this is how it's become. This is what the league has created, and it disappoints fans, but at the end of the day, this is better for football. Instead of one team spending $1 billion on everybody, and no one else gets a look in, you're going to create an even worse problem there. So this makes sense.
All right, and last but not least, is it just the cost of living crisis finally coming into football? Because we've seen inflated prices. I think Klopp's mentioned it. Many managers have mentioned it over the years. Prices are just going up and up and up for these players. The record fees keep getting broken. Are we just finally simply seeing this inflation ruin football or ruin the transfer values to the point where they're just not valuable anymore?
I think using the cost of living crisis in football maybe stretched too far when we're still talking about £50 million here and £30 million there as cheap options. But yes, the prices are now at such high. You got to remember last season what Rice went for 100, 105, something like that. Caicedo, similar price. You've got players who are going for a lot of money, and it's coming to the next big summer window, and we're like, well, why is he not worth that if he's worth that last summer? So if you look at the prices, sort of like City possibly selling Alvarez, rumoured he wants to leave, but we're like, no, we're going to have 80 million we want for him. And not everyone can afford that. Whether he's worth it or not is sort of up to debate, but not everyone can afford that, so teams get priced out. Then you got I've seen rumoured today, Osimhen, possibly Chelsea after him, possibly Arsenal even. His release clause is 120 million euros, I believe.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And the Napoli owner likes players to go on the release clause. That's why he puts them in there. He doesn't like negotiating. I've seen it with City over a few players that he didn't want to sell to us. He was like, release clause or nothing. Is he worth 120 million? Once again, up for debate kind of thing. But these are the prices that will stop you buying players. And release clauses are there to protect the clubs. Don't get me wrong. There is a reason for them, and they do work. But yes, teams are getting priced out and going, especially with, like we mentioned with the FFP stuff. I can't spend 120 million on Osimhen unless I sell 3 or 4 players for 20, 30 million each, kind of thing.
Well, I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see more player swaps, I think, because that's the key difference.
This is what your academies are for. You're making instant profit. So the teams that you're selling to are getting a good player because they either play or they've got potential, so they get that benefit, and you get a player in return. It's going to stop the big boys just signing all the good players, now that if that's how it's going to work. The game has created this monster for itself. Clubs have every right to put a release clause in, and that's how much Osimhen, for example, is worth to Napoli. Clubs can complain about it, but that's how much he's worth. And if a club is willing to pay it, then it will be triggered. The Neymar situation sparked a lot of that. Overinflated. Clubs have realised, well, if that's how much he's worth, I'll go for it. And it's created that cycle. Clubs wanted this, and then they don't want it because it doesn't benefit them at the same time. So it's created a monster that it can't control. We're going to an American version of the game now, where if we get more American owners in, and this transfer window is like a testament to that. Sign the young players or get players for free, act smoothly, and everyone can progress nicely. That's what the FFP and PSR is in to do, and that's what it should be doing, making sure everyone's competitive instead of just Crystal Palace selling their best players every year where they eventually fail. It's a pointless system otherwise. So it's created this monster, but there's the hope that this evens out, and it evens out fairly and properly where everybody gets a choice. City are not just going out there and buying a big name player because they can now. Newcastle are not throwing their money. Yes, it's their money, but you're going to ruin the league if you just spend it. If it's just one team, 2 team, whatever. So everyone is in this cycle. That's how I see it. Everyone is in this cycle. So hopefully everyone benefits from it over the long term. That's what I'd like to think will happen.
Yeah, easier said than done, I guess. But let's wrap it up. Let's pick one. We've discussed basically 4 points. What do we put it down to if we had to pick one? I do think it is FFP PSR related. That's what I'd say if I had to pick one.
I'd go with the prices of players. I think they're just so inflated these days, and it's just too big of a risk for clubs. Like spending 100 million on a player, like Caicedo for last summer. I thought he didn't have enough experience to warrant 100 million, but Chelsea paid it, and that's on Chelsea, kind of thing. So I think that's the biggest problem.
I think the summer tournaments have played the biggest role because they complement both of your points exactly. Clubs have to think about FFP, they have to think about PSR, they have to think about, being smart in the transfer market. But of course, that's also created overinflation, overinflated players. A tournament does just that. How many clubs could easily have gone and splashed money on one of the players, who's done well for 100 million and then realize he actually wasn't worth that at all and he wasn't that good? Then they're going to get hammered with FFP down the line or something like that. So I think that's played the big role. I think we'll see a lot more market activity in August and perhaps maybe an exciting deadline day, but I just think clubs are a little bit wiser now.
Well, there you have it. That just about wraps us up for this episode. One very quick point though, we are doing a free Lost in Possession FPL League. We'll put the details down below, but make sure you join. You've got to be subscribed on YouTube with notifications on, and follow us on Instagram as well. But as always, like, comment and subscribe. You know the drill.